Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Organising our NDIS Supports. Welcome Nicole and Andrea.
Thank you.
My name is Nicole Gamarov and I'm the founder of MyCareSpace. We're an online community that creates meaningful connections for people living with a disability. And we do this by connecting people with providers. We are delighted to be presenting this webinar today with Plan Partners. Plan Partners are the leading NDIS experts in plan management and support coordination and helping people bring their plans to life. I also just want to say thank you to everyone that is registered for this webinar. We were overwhelmed again by the number of questions that people sent in. We will definitely try and answer as many questions as possible during the next hour, but if your question has not been answered, Plan Partners team will contact you and they will attempt to answer all questions. So now some introductions. So rather than me introduce you, I'd love you to introduce yourself. So I don't know if you want to start, Andrea?
Yes, I'd love to. My name is Andrea Torres Opaza. I'm Head of Support Coordination here at Plan Partners. As Nicole mentioned, we offer support coordination services and plan management and head of our field. Myself, I've been in the disability and mental health space for almost a decade. I've worked with DHS and also subcontracted with the NDIS for some time as well. Here in Head of Support Coordination, we have offices all the way through Australia, and we're happy to provide this essential service.
So my name is Nicole Lee, and I'm a survivor advocate of violence, and I do anti-violence campaigning. But today I'm purely just a participant like yourselves of the NDIS, and I've been in receipt of the NDIS for 3 years now, so I'm on to my third plan. Yeah.
Great, thanks everyone. So now, the NDIS is upon us, and like all changes and scheme changes, it can be quite challenging, and there's no doubt that the NDIS can be difficult to navigate and hard to navigate at times. But it's all about choice and control. So given that choice and control is so important and it's such an integral part of our webinar, what does that mean to the two of you?
So for me, choice and control means that I get to, unlike the system was before the NDIS, I get to choose who comes into my house and who comes into my space and supports me and how they support me, and which is a huge change of what we had before. So I can choose who my support workers are, and I can choose who my support coordinator is, and what organisations and services I want to spend my plan money on to do the things that I want to do with my life and to achieve the goals that I want to achieve.
Right. Andrea?
For me, choice and control is knowing that everybody's different, everyone's circumstance is different, and how they want to choose to accept support is also very different. So choice and control is about having that choice to choose service providers, to choose what that support looks like, how frequent it is. And then the control is, of course, making that choice once again of how it's delivered, and that's how it's different from the old scheme, which is really very fundamental. It's about giving the control back to the participant, as opposed to having everyone fit into a template as it was in the past.
Thanks. So really, our webinar is about organising my NDIS supports, and we may touch on NDIS eligibility and some of the planning, research that people need to involve, but essentially there's 3 key questions that we want to answer today. So the first is, how can I spend my NDIS funds? That's the first section of the webinar. The second will be, how do I go about finding the supports? And then the third question is, how do I manage these supports? So there will already be 3 big questions that we're going to attempt to answer. So jumping into the first one around my NDIS plan and how do I spend my funds. Nicole, you're onto your 3rd plan, right? I understand it. For some people I know it's quite overwhelming receiving that first plan. How did you feel when you got your first plan?
Well, it's the same way I feel every time I get a plan. It's very anxiety provoking because you don't know what's been written in there from your planning meeting, and it's you receive that letter in the mail and it's a big envelope, and it's it's not, you can't miss that's what it is. And opening it for the first time, it was really confusing as to what all the different bits and pieces meant. And then over the consecutive years, every time I've opened my plan, it looks different.
Oh.
So it's normal and okay to not understand what is in front of you and to be confused, because we're all quite confused. This is really different, and it is really complex, and that everybody feels overwhelmed, unless you're somebody that's a total policy expert. These are really confusing and confronting plans. So yeah, that's I wish it felt nicer.
but there is help, and
Yes.
I guess people like Andrea, I mean, so you've obviously spent a lot of time in your time with the NDIA and now with Plan Partners, helping your clients understand their plans, and specifically helping people understand the different sections, so core, capital and capacity. How do you do that, Andrea?
Yes, so we've got little prompts here, and I can go through basically and very simply what each of these are. So core supports are for everyday activities that everybody goes through. So as in showering, getting dressed, personal care. It also includes domestic care, so gardening, cleaning, that sort of thing. And also in here is included some community participation. So going out doing grocery shopping, or just going out and seeing a friend. So really everyday tasks. Then we have capital supports. So capital supports include anything that is equipment related. So assistive technology is what the NDIA calls any kind of equipment that might be helpful, whether it's custom made or whether it's off the shelf. So this might include pressure cushions, wheelchairs, ramps. It also includes home modifications and vehicle modifications. Now, each of the things in capital supports also includes some funding in the therapies section, which is our next one, to make sure that you're getting the right equipment and the right supports for you moving forward with that. And then lastly, we've got capacity building supports. So this includes all of your therapies, OT, physio, speech therapy. It also includes behavioural intervention. So as I mentioned, some funding will be included in here if you have anything at all in capital supports, just to make sure that the equipment's right for you, or that whatever it might be is recommended is right for you. Capacity building can be thought of as goal-based hours. So goal-based supports, this is where you would want to achieve something, whether it be travel training or perhaps to brush your teeth unassisted or to set up a morning routine. Everything here has to be documented well by the allied health professional, and it's limited supports. It is the goal of the NDIA that eventually you won't need to have as much funding in here to be able to learn the things that you want to learn or improve the things that you want to improve. That's not always the case, but that is the overall goal.
Right. Thanks, Andrea. And obviously the language that we use with the NDIS is really important. So would you say it's important that people understand the difference between the three sections?
Absolutely, and so important as well for your allied health professional to understand a little bit about the legislation and a little bit about the premise behind the funding that you're getting. Otherwise, for example, the NDIA doesn't overlap with any other services that are provided in the community. So health and the NDIA has been one, where if your allied health professional writes anything to do with rehabilitation, the NDIA will deny that request right away because they say it's not their responsibility. So it's really important to have those little anecdotal understandings.
Right, and please keep the examples, practical examples coming, so that's really helpful. One of the questions we got from some of our participants in the webinar was, what do people do if they don't get enough funds or they don't get the funds for the supports that they ask? So, Nicole, what advice would you give these people?
So for anybody who's received their plan and hasn't met the needs that they've requested, would be to initiate a plan review straight away. I would highly recommend engaging an independent advocate to also advocate on your behalf, so that as many voices as you've got and as many people as you've got as possible to support you through that process, the better off you're going to be, emotionally as well as successful. And then if you've got support coordination in your plan, to be talking to your coordinators, and to Oh God, I forgot what else was in there.
Well, I think the advocate and getting other people to support you mentioned is important.
Yeah.
So in terms of not feeling like you're alone, there's a lot of different avenues that people can I guess turn to. So Andrew, from your perspective, we know, and we spent some time talking about core, but how much flexibility do people have within that core? Because for some people, the majority of their funds are sitting in core, and people are looking for flexibility. So can you share some insights around how flexible core funds are?
Absolutely, and luckily, the core supports are the most flexible out of all of them. So core supports, whatever amount of funding you have in there, provided, let's say you've got some funding for personal care and also funding for community access, and they're evenly split. However, as the plan progresses or as the time goes by, you realise actually you need a lot more personal care than what you do community outings for that time. Then you're absolutely able to use the majority, if not all of your funding on that personal care if that's what you want. Similarly, the other way around, if because of you engaging with an OT or an allied health professional, or just things are improving with time, you don't need as much personal care support and you'd like to access the community more and you'd like to use the majority, if not all of your funding on community access, core allows you to do that. The flexibility stops, however, in that all the things within core are flexible, but you cannot take some core funding, for example, and pop it into
You need a whole
capacity building. It's not possible. These are flexible completely, and these need to be spent as they're stated to be spent. So if you have OT, physio, speechy, you've got that funding in there, then that's what you need to spend it on. But you can't mix and match them.
So what about community access? Because you can have that in both, right? So how are they different?
So in core supports, community access is, as we've said, for your everyday activities. So if you want to go grocery shopping or just to visit friends and family, that's what you can use that with. But if it exists in capacity building, it's for a goal. So you're learning to do something. So perhaps travel training, or learning how to use the bus unassisted, or learning how to access the community or read a map or whatever it might be that your goal is. But these hours, because they're provided by an allied health professional, they're paid at a higher rate, and they also have to be noted. So the NDIA want to see the progression over the 12 months of how you started and what progress has been made.
Great, okay. And stated support, so we know that some supports are called stated supports, and it would be helpful for you to share what does this actually mean, and how can people work with those stated supports?
Absolutely. So an example of a stated support, and stated support means that it can only be spent on that particular activity. So there is, for example, support coordination. Support coordination funding is funding that's quarantined for a support coordinator to help you understand and navigate the NDIA, and it cannot be used on anything else. Of course, there is the flexibility of choosing whatever organisation you want to be able to help you, but you can't take support coordination funding, for example, and pop it into an OT. Similarly, in core, you might find a stated support where people are moving out of a community-based program that was existing before and was slowly phasing out. So you have to use it on that community program, which you were probably accessing before, and then over time, once you learn the system, you can choose other with your later plans.
Okay, great, fantastic. So community access is really important, and we know that is one of the values underpinning the NDIS is people being more engaged with the community. And Nicole, you're obviously someone that's very involved with the community around us, and we'd love to hear how do you use your NDIS funds to access the community and participate in some of the forums that you're active in?
So yeah, I use my funds to hire my support worker to come with me to 2 different meetings. Unfortunately she's not with me today because I'd love her to be here. But to access meetings and to be able to access the city and to be able to continue to do that and not burn as much energy as I have been, and also to pay for and support me in my position at university as well. So I hire a peer mentor that helps me at uni with accessing the online world as well as the physical world of the university campus. So for me, it's more a very practical kind of sense that I use my supports for community access.
Okay. And the peer support, so was that, the mentor, was that from core supports or
Yeah, it's my core supports.
Right.
Because that's an ongoing support need that, to continue to engage with the university. So it's not something that's going to be closed off anytime soon.
Yeah.
That's in my core supports.
Good, great. So another important component and aspect of the NDIS is reasonable and necessary, and we hear people talking about it all the time, and we know that there's the official definition of reasonable and necessary. But Andrea, in your everyday experience, what does it mean in practice, reasonable and necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, it has been defined somewhat in the legislation, but of course that is highly subjective, and it is open to interpretation. So often you'll have one planner that deems something reasonable and necessary and another that might disagree, which is why there are appeals processes in place. But for example, if somebody has a back garden that is uneven and they have requested to have perhaps a ramp added or for the garden to be made safe for them to access, it is deemed reasonable for somebody to want to access their own back garden, and it is deemed necessary as a part of life to have the flexibility to access all parts of your home. Similarly for widening door frames or changing the height of kitchen benches, things like that. That's what the reasonable and necessary, that's how it can be used. But it's really important that we note that reasonable and necessary, your interpretation of it needs to be also backed by the interpretation of an allied health professional to be able to back that assessment with an assessment or a report, to be able to say, yes, it is reasonable and necessary, and it's going to improve the quality of life of the participant.
Okay, and the aspects, so this book, which is using your NDIS plan, which I love, and it's a great, in it they also talk about, I guess, safety and value for money. Is that part of the reasonable and necessary, or is that a separate discussion?
Absolutely. The thing with the NDIA and the NDIS, the principles are that they all work together. So the value for money must also work together with the reasonable and necessary, and must also work together with improving the quality of life. So they're all variables that interlock and interchange. None of these can exist in a silo alone. So if you, for example, deem that it's reasonable and necessary to widen the door frames, however, it's not value for money to plate them all in gold, for example. Okay. So they must all be working together.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of general concepts, and I guess Nicole, you've covered your personal aspects. There's also the specifics. So people have asked very specific questions. So Andrea, these are for you. We've got a little quiz designed for you, and we're going to see how well you can and how quickly you can answer these three questions. So first one, can I claim dancing lessons from my NDIS funds?
The quick answer is yes. They need to be disability specific though, dance lessons, which there are organisations out there that offer them. And disability specific means that because they are catering for people with a disability, whether it be intellectual or physical, they offer a very specific service. It can't just be mainstream dance lessons. However, if you do want to access mainstream dance lessons, you can go ahead and pay for them, but the support worker will be covered by the NDIS that comes with you to support your access to the mainstream ones.
Thank you. Okay, question number 2. Am I conflicted if I want to use my support worker as my plan manager?
Yes, that does pose a conflict of interest. At the moment, for example, the NDIA Commission, which offers safeguards for people accessing the NDIS and also for service providers, is active in New South Wales and South Australia. Soon it will be active from July or June, July in the rest of the states except for WA, which will be 2020. But they will be the ones that will monitor all of these conflict of interest matters a lot more closely. At the moment, they're not, and so it's important for you to have an idea of what equals a conflict of interest. Definitely, the person that is producing the invoices should not be the person that is paying them.
Okay, and that's for a valid reason, right? There needs to be checks and balances. And
Indeed.
So, third question for you, Andrea. If I want a plan review, can I do it myself, or do I need an advocate to do it on my behalf?
You absolutely can do it yourself. However, we would highly recommend with the help of an advocate. So no, you can submit the paperwork and make the request completely unassisted. However, the report itself and the request itself can be quite complex, and there are bits of information that are essential that will help with your cause, as well as accompanying documentation that is going to hold weight to what you're asking for. So the short answer is yes, you can do it by yourself, absolutely. The long answer is it's best to seek support where you can.
Okay, great. So, and I think, Nicole, you mentioned, you also mentioned using an advocate where necessary, and so have you personally benefited from this or used it?
I haven't had to just yet.
Okay.
I've relied on my support coordinator and my OTs as well, and even my support agency. So somebody from the office has come to my planning meetings. So my last planning meeting I had myself. Somebody from the office from my support agency, where my support workers come from, and who knows me quite well, my support coordinator and an OT in my planning meeting. So I had as many people around me as possible to advocate on my behalf alongside me, because all of these the planning meetings are very anxiety provoking, and it's this is the next 12 months of your life that this meeting pins on. So the more people I had with me, the better I felt, and I'm also thinking sort of moving forward into the future, starting to engage with an independent advocacy service as well on top of all of those people, just in case.
Right, and I think we chatted about this before, that one should never go into a planning meeting or a review meeting on your own. You should always take some support, and if possible, as much as many people as possible within reason. So I think that really is sums up our first section of the webinar, which is how do I use my funds, and of course we will be producing handy resources and links after the webinar, and these will be emailed to you. So the second part of the webinar is how do I go about finding the right supports, and it sounds easier in theory than it is in practice, and I know this because at MyCareSpace we get a lot of people calling all the time, they just don't know where to start. So Nicole, you're onto your third plan, right? So you must have some experience now in finding supports. Can you give us some examples of how you've done this?
Yeah, so I'm not a huge fan of online, so I do a lot of word of mouth with people, and even down to my support worker. She helped me find a gardener from other people's homes that she's in, and then seeing other services around. So asking people around me, word of mouth from other participants within the scheme, and then starting to dabble in the online world. So online forums, so like the NDIS grassroots, and I will start eventually. I'm going to have to move to things like MyCareSpace as well, but multiple different sources. Don't just rely on one area for all of your source of information. Go to many different areas. Look far and wide, and ask people. Really. If you've got people that you can talk to and ask their advice of who they go with, and have those conversations.
Great. And obviously, Andrea, you being head of support coordination at Plan Partners, I'm sure you spend every day doing this for people. So what are some of the other ways that people might be able to bring their plans to life and find the supports that are really going to help them achieve those goals?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it makes a real difference if you do have support coordination in your plan. Then the support coordinator is a great wealth of information. If you don't, then highly recommend that you access your LAC. So perhaps if there is a local office, I would try and drop in. If not, try and give them a call. Each one of the offices, if you don't have support coordination, do have some funding for each participant to be able to access LAC services. And that is connecting you to the different services or providing advice. I know that that's very difficult at times as well. So barring that, I would say Google, good old Google. And make sure that you make the phone calls. So do connect with them once you've found, a couple of people or services that may be useful.
Yeah.
Give them a call, find out what their referral process is, find out how much of a wait there is to see, find out their specialisation, and if they can help you with whatever goal it is that you want to be able to achieve. And also any other prerequisites that you have, if you prefer working with a female, if you prefer that they come into your home, or if you would like to visit them and can visit them in the office. These sorts of things to really just cement the idea of what you need first, and then find the services that are likely to meet your needs.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you should mention all these different components, because we're seeing at MyCareSpace more and more people are becoming more discerning in terms of how they choose their service providers. So it's not just based on location, it's not just based on price, but it might be the gender of the support workers, or it might be the languages that they speak. And we're actually creating filters at MyCareSpace that are going to allow people to select providers using those different aspects that you mentioned. So that's great. But what about people who are living in rural and remote areas where they might not have any NDIS registered providers, or there are some towns where they're limited support and it's just very thin on the ground? So, Andrea, what advice would you give people in these areas?
Yes, definitely. I would say a main piece of advice for people living in rural or remote areas is to seek and obtain plan management. So we're going into a different sort of area where the plan can be, any NDIS plan or different sections can be managed in different ways. The first way is agency managed, and that means that you can only work with organisations that are registered with the NDIA, and they have to go through a process of registration. They also adhere to the price guide, and it's an easier process in that you connect with them and they invoice the NDIA directly, and that be that. The other way is plan management, and this is what I encourage people to use, just because you've got the flexibility of using any service provider. They still have to adhere to the price guide, of course. However, with a plan manager, like what Plan Partners do, the invoices get sent through to us. We make sure that they're correct by the ATO standards, and request the funding from the NDIA and make the payments for you. Because it's a slightly more complex process, it has to be done by an organisation outside of the NDIA, Plan Partners or several others, but it gives you that flexibility that you can use anyone. You don't have to seek just NDIS registered providers. The third way is self-management. If you have experience in doing that, or perhaps an accounting degree, you might want to do that, just because it is very complex. You need to keep invoices with you for up to 5 years. You may be audited. There's a whole process that you need to stay on top of. So that people who are used to that in the old scheme might choose to do that. It's a very small fraction of the population. But rural and remote means that you've got that flexibility with already minimal amounts of supports that are available, to be able to access anyone that's around.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of self-managing, I think you don't need an accounting degree. I think obviously not everyone is comfortable
using lots
Excel,
of people that self-manage it and manage to do that quite well. I personally don't want to, because I don't like accessing the portal, and that's my choice, and that's my feeling of choice and control. Is it's my choice not to use the portal and not have to deal with managing my budget. But there's lots of people that are fantastic at doing that kind of stuff, and all the more power to them, I wish I was. But if you want to take on self-management, then give that a go, and I wouldn't hold back from anybody that feels that that's the choice that they want to go, then that's the choice that they want to take.
And it's all part of choice and control.
Yeah.
With advice and support, I have to say, because definitely if that's what you want to tackle, then by all means seek the advice and the processes and procedures that are correct in doing that.
And look, I mean, I think the important thing is go with your eyes wide open and be informed. So in terms of those components, rural and remote. The other thing we see is telehealth, so people are more and more turning to telehealth, and this is becoming more mainstream. And I think with technology the way it is, we even have a tele-dentist on MyCareSpace, so you can actually get dental support. So they can't do your fillings, but it's certainly something for people to consider in rural and remote areas. What about people from culturally diverse backgrounds? Andrea, we know that for many of them it's even more difficult to navigate the NDIS. Where can these people turn?
Definitely. The NDIS has a contract with TIS National, which is a national translating service. So as long as you've got an NDIS number, you can contact the TIS National number and give them your NDIS and get a telephone translator right there and then for whatever appointment you might have. You can also book them to come to face-to-face appointments if that's going to help as well. But it's important to note that there are lots of other services that are not a part of the NDIA, community and mainstream services that help with called backgrounds and translators and information, and may also be able to help you here as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're seeing a lot of not agencies, they're community-based organisations that are actually registering with the NDIS because they see the need to be able to support their community and the people in their community that have a disability. So yeah, look out for them, and they certainly exist. There are also two very useful websites. So there's the multilingual hub, and then there's the translations website. So the multilingual disability website and the translation hub. And again, they have translated many of the NDIA documents into multiple different languages. So great. So really, we've covered off the second part now, which is finding the right supports. We then move on to the third part of the webinar, which is about how do we manage those supports. And this question, I think, really varies a lot depending on whether you agency manage, self-manage, or have support coordination, right? But maybe the toughest group might be those that don't have support coordination. So Andrea, do you have some tips? What are your top tips for people who want to know how do they manage their supports if they don't have support coordination?
Yes, definitely. With all cases, I do highly recommend support. So as I've mentioned before, try and access your LAC. Barring that, it being that it's difficult to access or make an appointment right away, I would say just get some help from somebody that you know to be able to look at the plan and, for example, sit down and divide the amount over the 12 months. So if you've got 30,000 for community access, for example, divide that figure by 12 and then again by 4 to be able to know how much funding you've got. And then using the price guide, you can see how much is per hour to be used for that kind of support. And you can see and divide it as well. It's important to note that the price guide has got different prices for Saturday and Sunday rates as well as weekday rates. So then if you want to delve a little bit deeper to see what the variances are there, and that will give you an idea of how much funding you've got to be able to use on each category, and then hopefully prevent over or underspending.
Yeah, I think I passed a comment the other day that everyone should have a copy of their price guide in their handbag, and I was shot down, and not everyone wants to carry a copy of the price guide, so fair enough. I'm sure, Nicole, you don't.
No, I don't. I definitely don't.
You do have support coordination.
Yes, I
How
do.
has this helped you?
Well, I guess it helps me with all sorts of bits and pieces. So definitely for planning meetings, and every 12 months that comes around, finding new supports when another one pulls out. He helps with managing my service agreements. Let's see what else. Lots of things. I'm on the phone to my support coordinator quite regularly about all the different hiccups and bumps along the way that I've had with the NDIS, things that are confusing, or decisions that they've decided to make, or because I've also somebody that handles the money as well. So if I need to chase up an invoice, I can get onto him to help me chase that up as well. So I'm not constantly having to do everything myself. So I can give my coordinator a call and just say, hey, do you want to chase up on this invoice? I haven't heard anything and it hasn't been paid, and all sorts of bits and pieces that he helps me with along the way. And I don't feel like I'm doing it alone.
No, and you're not alone. I guess it's just for people who've asked for support coordination and haven't received it. So would that be grounds for a plan review?
I would be.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yes, you can definitely request it. There are, for example, there's nothing in the legislation that says that you absolutely are eligible for support coordination.
Okay.
But for plan management, for example, you can request it and it's your right to have it. But with support coordination, you need to have very strong justifications as to why. And some of these might include there is no informal support network to be able to help you to understand these things. Perhaps
Well, no informal support network there if something happens to you and you're sick and in hospital and can't actually, access anything and do things. So, it's not necessarily if you can't, somebody help you do it, or if, because the fluctuating nature of disability, it's my fear is around if something happens to me, then I don't have anybody to take over that position for me informally.
Definitely. All of these, and again, very strong justifications explained in your plan review report will put you in a better position to get an approval.
Good. And I think we spoke earlier that mistakes do happen and there are errors in plans. So, if you think that there's a mistake, what advice would you give people there? Either of you.
Oh, wait. So what advice would I give somebody?
Yeah, if they think that there's a mistake in their plan.
Sorry, let's just start again. I zoned out. So can you ask the question again?
Yeah, so sometimes people might have a look at their plan and believe that there's a mistake or an error. So what does one do in that situation?
So for myself, the first person I called when I thought there was a mistake on my plan was my support coordinator straight away, and then instantly started contacting the NDIA around what we thought was the error and initiating a plan review. And then on top of that, again, all of those things like engage an advocate and start that process of advocating to the NDIA why you think this mistake is, what this mistake is, and to look at having it rectified.
So I guess that's what I'm hearing is you need to be proactive.
Yes.
And there may be situations where you need to apply some pressure.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with that process. There's what's called a review of a reviewable decision. It's a review that can be done within the first 3 months of the plan being approved. So engaging in that process as quickly as possible is definitely helpful.
Okay, so if you're concerned, don't sit on it. Get moving with the review. Right.
Definitely.
So we've spoken about support coordination and what about plan management? We touched on it briefly, but if we go back to organising the supports and managing the supports, how does the plan manager specifically help me manage my supports?
Well, specifically, I only know a lot about Plan Partners. So we plan management included in your plan means that we pay the invoices that are received. However, where plan management is done within Plan Partners that is helpful is that we have what's called the dashboard. So you can see in live time what invoices have been paid, what's pending, what's been rejected. So that gives you a little bit of an insight into what's happening and also how to track your own expenditure. I would say I would find it difficult not being able to see that or having to call in to be able to find that information right now. But apart from that, I can't comment on
other organisations. Well, I think we the whole idea of being in control. You want to know, well, how much have you spent? How much funds do you have available? And are you going to run out of funds, right? So that dashboard must be, people must love it, right? Because I know I would love that. But Nicole, if there's this fear of running out of funds, so overspending, I know there's some people who are concerned about underspending. What advice would you give people in terms of managing that?
So just sitting down and breaking it down, like we were just saying before, breaking it down into how much you have per week out of your core funding to spend on meeting your needs on a weekly basis, to know whether or not you're going over or under on a weekly basis is definitely my advice that I'd give to anybody out there. And if you're underspending, sort of looking at why am I underspending? What needs aren't I meeting of mine right now? And for myself, underspending is more predominantly from the fact that trying to engage support workers to the level that I actually need sometimes is actually really difficult. There's a huge demand, and I'm very specific with who I want in my house, and it's my private space, so that creates a little bit of headache for myself and difficulty, and it's a little unfortunate sometimes.
Yeah. So Andrea, the concern about underspending and overspending, what have you seen, or what advice could you give people if they feel that they might be underspending?
Sure. If they're underspending, of course, as Nicole said, have a good look at why, and if you've got support coordination, get that support to analyse the plan and see where there is extra or available funding, and where you can use it, because there are several other options. As we know, for example, if you're underspending in core, you can use it on domestic help, personal care, or community access. So is there an event that perhaps you could plan in advance or something like that? But if it's at the end of the plan and you've realised that you've really underspent, but you feel that you're going to need that funding in the next plan, it's really important to justify why. So as Nicole said, perhaps it's just an inadequacy of the available services, or you haven't been able to engage in quite the right one, and it hasn't been the right fit, but your plans do continue and your goals continue for you to spend that funding as you would want to in the future. Just make sure you pop that in the report, because the NDIA and planners see hundreds of plans a week, and so if the justifications are not there or available for them, it can be easy for them to make assumptions and just say, well, it wasn't spent and so therefore it mustn't be needed, and it wasn't mentioned in the report, so I'm just going to reduce that plan. Whereas if you put the justification in there saying, no, all the plans are there to spend that funding and it will contribute to the meaning of life and perhaps add quality of life, they're more likely to just roll it over and give it another go.
Yeah, hopefully that's what will happen. They'll roll it over and you get and their understanding in that instance. But it's a bit of a reality that we're all kind of facing at the moment, is that there isn't enough support workers to meet the demand going on, and having to go into those meetings. This is not because there's a difference between surviving and thriving with your NDIS plan. So there's some weeks where I'm just getting enough support just to get by in that week, whereas it's not really enough to meet the goals that I actually wanted to meet, and making sure that when you're going into those planning meetings that you really explain that to them and state that the difference between just getting by and meeting your goals.
Yeah. And no one wants to just get by, right?
No, none of us get by.
None of us want
it's not by choice.
It's not fun, right? It's not fun, not at all. So we've spoken about underspending. What about overspending? Because people might find that they're actually spending too much, or that their current budget isn't going to. It's not going to allow them to have all the supports they need for the full 12 months. What do people do in that situation?
It depends on how far along you are in your plan when you notice that you're overspending.
Yeah, true.
So if it's within the first 3 months and you notice, look, these funds are not going to be adequate for the goals that I've got and nowhere near, then initiate a plan review immediately, that review of a reviewable decision within the first 3 months, and then with support, get advice. So if you start engaging with service providers in a higher rate, as you would want to, it can help your cause when the plan review comes around, because you've shown an example of how it could work. Whereas if you keep to the lowest and not using that funding and not using the care, the NDIA again may be in a position to make the assumption, well, you've lasted several months without accessing what you say that you need, so how necessary is it? But again, do not attempt this without the support and guidance of a support coordinator or an LAC, because you will put yourself at substantial risk of running out of funding way too fast and then having no support at all. Granted, if you notice that you're overspending and you've gone to 9 months of your plan or 8 months of your plan, this is again where you would seek support, or I'd advise seeking support again and seeing where it's possible to be able to either reduce the funding or reduce the supports to make your funding last, Or I would also speak with the service providers and see if it's possible to negotiate. Many service providers will continue to provide the support at the level that you have it, with that knowledge and the negotiation and the support. And then, of course, initiating that plan review. Advise the NDIA immediately of what's happening so that they know that the next plan will need to include some of that funding that has been overspent, and also some more funding for the following year.
Okay. So the important thing is find the right help in terms of making sure that you're making the right decisions and not putting yourself at risk. So we've got a few more really important questions that I'd like to get through, and I think the one that really is important when we talk about managing and organising our supports is service agreements, right? So back to you, Nicole. So again, you must have, onto your third plan, you must have seen your fair share of service agreements. Any tips there for people who are looking at setting up their service agreements for the first time?
I guess no, not really personally. The service agreements come out and I sign them and send them back. You're not locked into spending all of that money just because you've signed a service agreement. If I disengage with a service, then the funding that goes to that service stops right there and then. And this is where we have the choice to engage or disengage with anyone at any point during that 12 months that you choose. And again, I rely quite heavily on my support coordinator to help me with all of this, with doing the service agreements as well.
Okay. Andrea, so what are the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to service agreements?
Well, I think it's important to understand what a service agreement is, and that will avoid miscommunication or any kinds of mistakes. In that, a service agreement is an agreement to work with a service provider, and they reserve that amount of funding. And then as the services are provided, then they provide invoices and chip away at that funding over the 12 months or whatever it might be that the agreement is. But as Nicole said, at any time you can stop services with them and take the remaining amount of funding and try another service provider. So know that it's not a contract and you have as much flexibility as you need to.
Okay.
Yeah, this is where participants have the I guess a little bit more control in this and power in this area. That if you're not happy with the service, then disengage and connect with another one and encourage anybody. And I've done this a few times. I've had to pick up and move to other agencies and other providers for that very reason. And this is something that we've never had before, and we have that right and that opportunity to actually have these, state these things now. Whereas, before in the past, if you didn't like the service that was being provided, you didn't have any choice. This was the service. Deal with it. Whereas now we have a choice to say, no, this doesn't fit for me. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely what we're seeing is people are more confident in their decisions and being more discerning about changing. So absolutely, if you're not happy with the level of service, you need to start looking around, speak to people and find out. I mean, in some cases, people don't have a lot of options. Again, that's where we say, look at mainstream businesses who are not NDIS registered, but you can still engage with them either through a plan manager or self-managing. But don't settle for something you're not happy with.
Indeed, and also do ask for service agreements, because it's important to note that with self-management, even plan management, service agreements are not mandated. It's only with agency managed that they're absolutely necessary. A service agreement outlines the service that you agree to receive or that they agree to give. It also outlines the prices or how much money they're going to reserve. So these things are important, but unless you ask for them, if you're self or plan managed, you may not get one.
Yeah, okay, so they are important, very important. So I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Really, the question that's popped up quite a few times is engaging a support worker directly. So a lot of people would like to have more choice around the person that is their support worker, whether it's the gender or whether it's the language that they speak. So how do people go about hiring or engaging a support worker directly? So I don't know, either of you might have some comments.
Did you want to go first?
Engaging a support worker directly So you mean as in hiring them yourself?
So
That isn't an availability for self-managed or plan-managed customers, participants of the NDIA. What the NDIS? Pardon me.
Oh, we use them interchangeably. Many people know by this stage. NDIA, NDIS, same thing.
So what I would say about that is just to make sure that they have the correct qualifications, that they have the right checks behind them, that they have working with children's or police checks, that they have the right insurance, if possible. So why that was included as a possibility under the scheme was that there are many people that do access supports from other people in the community that they're familiar with, and as that's become now an availability, these checks and safeguards have also been initiated. Yeah, and I think it's important. Of course, it is still, for that person, it is their workspace, but it is also your home and your personal space too. So it's important to keep that level of respect up by acknowledging the legislation.
Okay, and Nicole, in terms of your experience?
So I haven't engaged a support worker independently of the service agency that I'm with. But if you know somebody and you're comfortable with them, then and you've worked with them and you're thinking of going that way, then I don't see why you couldn't do it or why you shouldn't do it. But as you said, it's you've got to think of all the aspects around this is your personal space and this is your home, and making sure that whatever you're choosing to do is safe as well. So for myself, as I said, I don't like different workers. I don't like strangers in my home, and I like female support workers. And I have a very gendered nature around the supports that I have come into my home because of my own personal reasons. But you've got to respect yourself and respect your space, and some support workers don't necessarily fit. So also for support workers, I think they're also coming into your space as well, so they've got to feel comfortable too. So there's got to be a two-way street with this respect, so going between yourself and your support worker. And I've had support workers where it just doesn't fit, and we just don't work very well together. And I've got a support worker now that I never want to let go of, and we are a fantastic fit.
Team.
Yeah, we are a fantastic fit and a fantastic team, and we do have that mutual respect for each other. And and as you said, you're making sure there's working with children checks. They're there for a reason. So that you and your family, because I've got children as well, you and your family and your home and your space is safe and respected.
Great, and look, I mean, I think there's so many different options that are available nowadays. So of course there's online platforms where you can go and you can choose a support worker higher up. They employ the care worker, so the insurance is taken care of by them. Then you've got care seekers where they can help you find the support worker, but you employ them, and you need to think about the insurances, you need to think about all the taxes around it. So again, we will put as many resources as we have around these topics, so hiring a support worker, but certainly people need to try maybe a couple of different options, and takes time, I guess. So that really brings us to the end of our three main questions, and again, I'll just reiterate, if we haven't answered your question, the team at Plan Partners will take time to respond via email, and they will respond individually to questions that have not been answered, so please contact us. But one last piece of advice from both of you before we finish up. So I don't know who wants to go first. You can go first.
My piece of advice would be to have patience with the scheme. Things take time, and it's still changing and evolving, and hopefully will be a reflection of what is needed most by the people accessing the scheme. So when a plan comes out, it's supposed to be that plan is a 12-month relationship, if you will, with the NDIA to achieve the set goals. And as Nicole mentioned, not every worker is going to be a perfect fit right away, and be comfortable and confident to try other things around. The whole premise, I guess, of the NDIA is to strengthen organisations that are doing the right thing, that are providing quality services, whilst taking funding away simultaneously from the ones that really aren't. And that's where it's about giving the feedback so that the NDIA and the NDIS can become exactly what is necessary in the community.
And I love the feedback because I guess MyCareSpace is always looking for reviews and comments about service providers, and that's exactly it. It's the good service providers are going to thrive, and the ones that are not providing great service are not going to thrive. So, Nicole, you're going to have the last word.
My piece of advice is the things that I've just said before, and reiterating that if you're not happy with a support worker, then do not put up with somebody treating you badly or speaking to you inappropriately in your home, and to voicing your choice and control, and taking your service elsewhere, because this is your life and your goals that you're working on, and your interaction with the world and your everyday experience. Really making sure that keeping yourself safe and keeping yourself happy with the people that are coming into your home and that are helping you in your life is really, really integral, and that's been a really sort of core integral thing for me, which has been the big change from the system before, where you didn't have that choice, and if you didn't like the worker that the council sent around for you, you just had to deal with it. And now I can actually have a say in what goes on in my space and in my intimate life as well, and I think that's probably on top of everything else that we've said today is a really integral and important piece of advice. And also I guess sort of one extra bit at the end is that we don't, for myself and for other people, is that we're also moving into a space where we don't have to be putting as much pressure and relying on informal supports anymore. So if you have had to survive and get by on informal supports in the past, doesn't mean that you have to again in the future. And if your parents, like my parents, are getting older and going into a planning meeting and having people ask about those things, is that you don't have to be relying on the people around you to do these things. So you can go back to having an everyday relationship with your parents, your partners, your children, and that you can hire support workers to come in your home to do those moving part things, so you're free to have everyday relationships with the people in your life again, and to start exploring those options if you haven't already. It's my piece of advice I think I give to people.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing that. I think it's more than just an ordinary or normal life. It's everyone's entitled to an exceptional life, and so that's what we're here to do. And Plan Partners is also there, and they will be there to respond to any questions that have not been answered. MyCareSpace will send you some resources. And just a final huge thank you to both of you, Andrea and Nicole, for sharing of your time and your insights. So thank you.
Thank you.